Here you are. To fight for freedom, do you need a people, or is one man enough? Freedom has never been cheap. It has always been paid for with blood, fear, and loss. Sometimes one person stands up and says no to an entire empire, even while in chains. Other times, thousands rise together, lifting their swords at the same moment, stepping onto the battlefield as one. History has seen both paths. On one side stands Spartacus, a slave, a gladiator, a man who did not even own his own name, yet his desire for freedom was as vast as Rome itself. On the other side stand the Vikings, not one man, a people, fear arriving by sea, a culture that spoke with steel, men who lived freedom as a law. One fought for freedom, the others fought as freedom, and today we face a single question. To fight for freedom, do you need a people, or is one man enough? This is not only a question of history, it is a question of humanity, and the answer was written in blood. Who were the Vikings? The Vikings were not just warriors. They were not an empire. They were a people. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, they lived in the harsh lands of Scandinavia, a place of cold climates, poor soil, and unforgiving survival conditions. This land gave them two choices: endure or sail away. The Vikings chose the sea. They built ships, long, fast, terrifying vessels. These ships were not just transportation. They were keys to freedom. For the Vikings, freedom was not an idea. It was a way of life. Even when they had kings, no ruler was treated as a god. Decisions were often shared. Honor, word, and courage stood above written law. They did not fear battle because they did not fear death. In their belief, a warrior who died with honor was welcomed into Valhalla. That is why Vikings charged forward. They did not retreat. Europe called them barbarians because Vikings broke rules. They crossed walls. They refused to believe that empires were untouchable. But the Vikings did more than raid. They traded. They founded cities. They built kingdoms. A Viking who attacked one year could rule the next. For them, war was not the goal. It was a tool to live freely, a tool to be remembered. The Vikings were not one man. They were a shared spirit, and that spirit became Europe's greatest fear. Who was Spartacus? Spartacus was not a people. He was not a culture. He was one man, taken from his homeland, stripped of his name, his freedom sold. To Rome, Spartacus was not human. He was property. In the gladiator school, his body was trained for combat, but his spirit was never trained for obedience. The arena was entertainment for Rome. The crowd roared. Blood was applauded. But with every fight, Spartacus understood one truth. This system survived on death. And one night, he made a decision. Not to fight for Rome, not to fight for the arena, but to fight for freedom. A handful of gladiators escaped, then dozens, then thousands. Slaves gathered around Spartacus because he was more than a warrior. He was hope. For the first time, the Roman Empire feared its slaves. Spartacus did not build an empire. He had no treasury, no state behind him. What he had was will, and that will shook Rome itself for years. Spartacus lost. He died. The rebellion was crushed. But Rome lost something too, the myth of being untouchable. Spartacus proved that even one man can shake a system. He did not destroy the empire, but he carved a sentence into history. Even if I was not born free, I can still die for freedom. Part 3. Rebellion versus a people. Is one man enough to fight for freedom? Here, history reveals two different paths. The first path is rebellion. The second path is a people. Spartacus was rebellion. He began alone. There was no state behind him, no treasury, no centuries-old culture to support him. Those who gathered around him were desperate people, slaves, runaways, men who had nothing left to lose. It was a cry for freedom, but rebellions carry a weakness. They depend on the leader. While Spartacus lived, the rebellion lived. When Spartacus fell, the rebellion ended. Because rebellion survives on the will of one man. The Vikings were not rebellion. They were a people. Their freedom did not depend on one man's courage. It was passed from family to family, from generation to generation. If one Viking fell, another took his place. because this was not an individual uprising, but a collective identity. When the Vikings lost leaders, they did not collapse. They changed routes, they changed lands, but they did not change who they were. This was freedom made durable. And here lies the key difference. Spartacus shook the system. The Vikings changed the system. Spartacus frightened Rome. The Vikings reshaped Europe. One was a spark, the others were fire. But this does not mean one was weaker than the other. History shows something important. Every people begins with a Spartacus. First one man says no, then thousands say enough. Rebellion is the beginning. A people is the result. History teaches us a simple but heavy truth. Freedom often begins with one person. Someone like Spartacus stands up and says, enough. He does not destroy the system, but he awakens it. Because fear is silent, but courage is contagious. When one man rises, thousands begin to think for the first time. But history does not end there. Because freedom is not only something that is won, it is something that must be protected. And at this point, a people are needed. The Vikings showed us this. They did not tie freedom to one leader, to one ideology, to one family. They tied it to generations. One Viking fell, freedom did not, because it belonged not to one man, but to everyone. The greatest changes in history do not happen through rebellion alone or through power alone. They follow a pattern. First, one voice, then thousands of voices, and only then, a changed world. And now the question stands before us once again. Is one man enough to fight for freedom? Yes, to begin. But to keep freedom alive, you need a people. Because one man can shake history, but only a people can change it. And history has already proven that. History books close. Names fall silent. Swords sink into the earth. But questions do not. Spartacus died. The Vikings faded. Yet the struggle for freedom did not end with them. Because history is not only what happened in the past, history is repeated behavior. There are no arenas today, no crowds cheering for blood, but systems still exist. Power still concentrates, fear still spreads quietly. And in every era, the same question is reborn. Can one person make a difference? History answers yes, but it also adds a warning. If that voice does not reach others, change remains incomplete. Without Spartacus, the slaves would never have risen. Without a people like the Vikings, freedom would remain only a memory. Today, we still live between these two paths. Sometimes we stay silent. Sometimes we watch. Sometimes we say, "What can I do?" And in that moment, history begins to breathe again. Because history is not written only by heroes. It is written by choices, by silence, by speech, by looking away, by standing up. And perhaps the heaviest legacy history leaves us is this. Freedom is never fully won. It must be protected by every generation. Sometimes it begins with one person, but it always continues with a people. History has not ended. It is simply waiting for the next decision. The Vikings did not rise to fight for freedom. They were born into it. For them, freedom was not a slogan, not a goal, not a revolution. It was everyday life. The Vikings were not tied to one man, not to one king. When a leader fell, the people did not stop, because their strength was never in a single voice. It was in unity. They sailed because the land was scarce, not out of fear, but by choice. When a Viking went to battle, he carried his family, his clan, his name behind him. He did not fight alone. He represented a people. The Vikings did not rebel against empires. They showed that empires were not untouchable. They came, they saw, and they changed things. Sometimes they destroyed, sometimes they built, sometimes they simply stayed. Because for the Vikings, freedom was not something to be taken. It was something to be lived. One Viking fell, freedom did not, because it did not belong to one man. It belonged to the people. And in history, it is rare to see a people live freedom so quietly, yet so enduringly. One was a man in chains. The other was a people born free. Spartacus fought for freedom. The Vikings lived as freedom. One became a symbol. The others became a legacy. So which is stronger, a single voice or a united people?